By the end of 1941, the struggle for control of the maritime trade routes was over 2 years old and going very much in favour of the Axis. The battle was vital. Britain was almost completely dependent on the steady flow of vital raw materials brought by merchant shipping. Without these supplies, she could not even feed her population, never mind make the weapons needed to prosecute the war. The Germans had several means at their disposal to attack the trade routes. Their powerful air force was an obvious tool for commerce warfare, and soon made the English Channel far too hot for British shipping. But the Luftwaffe was short of long-range aircraft and could have little effect on the Atlantic convoy system. Mines, spearheaded by the new magnetic types, were extensively sown at British harbours, but although individually dangerous, their main effect was the tying up of resources to clear them. In the 1930s, the German Navy was still dominated by the big gun ship school, and planned to make extensive use of surface raids to attack the British convoy system. As with most other navies, it took some time before they realised that battleships, although still powerful, were not the force they once had been. They were expensive to build and maintain, and being large and very visible, there was a significant political cost if they were lost. In contrast, submarines were cheap and quick to build, and less vulnerable owing to the difficulty in detecting them. The main champion of the U-boat in the inter-year wars was Admiral Karl Dönitz, himself an ex-submarine captain. U-boats had worked well for the Germans in the Great War, and Dönitz realised that advances in technology that increased their reliability, speed, armament and range could make them a war winner. He supervised the clandestine construction of Nazi Germany's new U-boat fleet, and was appointed in 1936 as its commander. The British were far from complacent about the U-boat threat, and in the interwar years had carefully thought out tactics and pioneered new methods of underwater detection. However, these new technologies were still very new, and early radar and sonar sets were notoriously delicate. Finding the elusive U-boats remained a significant problem. The British had correctly instituted a convoy system as soon as war had broken out. Unfortunately, in the early years they were critically short of escort vessels, especially ones with a range that could cover the vital transatlantic routes. Many of the early convoys were woefully ill-protected and suffered horrific casualties as a result. Dönitz had developed the concept of the wolfpack. This involved a group of U-boats spreading out along the anticipated path of a convoy. The first detected would not attack itself but shadow, homing the other members of the pack by radio. The U-boats would slowly surround their prey and carry out a concerted attack, usually at night and usually on the surface. U-boats only normally submerged if they were threatened. On the surface, U-boats could use diesel engines, making them faster than merchant ships, but underwater they were forced to use electric motors, which made them much slower than most convoys. These tactics proved extremely effective. The small, deadly U-boats roved the sea lanes almost with impunity, and culled the barely protected merchant ships in vast numbers. 1,200 were lost in the first year of the war alone, the majority as a result of submarine attack. In response, the British stepped up escort production, and by 1941 over 400 were in service. Nonetheless, an average of only 2 U-boats were being sunk every month. It was clear that mere numbers were not enough. Various convoy battles were analysed in detail, revealing, amongst other things, that depth charge patterns were frequently being set to explode at too shallow a depth. However, tactical thinking on how to defeat submarines was still primitive and essentially defensive in nature. In the closing months of 1941, the focus of the convoy battles shifted from the mid-Atlantic to the shorter routes from Gibraltar to the British Isles. The move was occasioned partly by stronger escorts on the Atlantic routes, but mostly by a decision by German High Command to reinforce the Italians in the Mediterranean theatre. Dönitz, who was convinced that his U-boats could decide the war in the Atlantic, considered this to be a strategic error, but resigned himself to making the best of the situation. The shorter routes meant that his boats would be able to stay on patrol for longer, as they would be closer to their bases. They would also benefit from more air reconnaissance. It did not take long for the British to pick up this shift of emphasis. Aircraft based at Gibraltar began reporting increased numbers of contacts with U-boats. The British responded by upgrading the escorts of the Gibraltar convoys. During the second week of December, elements of the force that normally patrol the Straits of Gibraltar reinforced the outward bound convoy HG77. This convoy was spotted by the Germans, but arrived virtually unmolested. This convinced the British Admiralty that a heavy attack would be expected on the next Gibraltar convoy, HG76. The primary covering force for HG76 was the 36th Escort Group, commanded by the tempestuous but talented Commander F.J. Walker. It consisted of 2 sloops and 7 corvettes. The convoy had been scheduled to sail in early December, but this departure was delayed while additional escorts were scraped up. 3 destroyers, 2 more sloops and 3 more corvettes were assigned from the Gibraltar patrol, although many would only be available for a short period. In addition, a hunting group of 4 more destroyers was deployed ahead of the convoy's route. Most important of all, the auxiliary aircraft carrier Audacity was made available. Audacity had been part of the HG77 convoy and had proven to be very successful in suppressing German reconnaissance planes. She had been swiftly and basically converted from a captured German merchant ship, the Hanover. She was not a large or particularly suitable aircraft carrying platform, and wastage of planes due to deck accidents was high. It was intended to make up numbers with Swordfish torpedo bombers from Gibraltar, but the ship proved incapable of handling them. However, Gibraltar-based aircraft would still be available to help the convoy during the difficult time at the start of the journey when it would be crossing the U-boat patrol lines. The convoy also included a merchant catapult ship, the Darwin, and in fact HG76 was one of the most heavily escorted convoys seen so far in World War II. There were so many escorts that Walker was able to deploy them in a double ring around the merchant vessels, making it even more difficult for U-boats to get at them. Commander Walker was an expert in anti-submarine warfare, and was to become the most successful and feared submarine hunter of the war, but HG76 was his first chance to demonstrate his skills. He had studied the German tactic of wolfpack attacks very extensively, and had come to the conclusion that existing tactics were far too defensive. From the beginning of the war, it had been accepted without challenge that escorts should stay close to merchants at all times. Walker resolved instead to counterattack detected U-boats immediately. He devised a pre-arranged counter-move codenamed Buttercup. At the order, Buttercup starboard, or port or stern or whatever, the nearest escorts were to turn to the indicated direction on set courses, sweeping with ASDIC. All ships would illuminate the area with flares and special rockets known as Snowflake. Hardly an ideal solution, but one forced on the defenders by lack of reliable radar sets. The idea was to sanitize a stretch of sea around a possible contact. Unfortunately for Walker, the main reason why so many escorts were available for HG76 was that the Gibraltar run was much shorter, and so older, low-endurance escorts, of which there was a considerable number, could be used. These vessels were also slow, and therefore particularly unsuited for his tactic of aggressive responses to U-boat contacts. The Germans were indeed planning a major attack on HG76. They were warned of its departure by agents in Spain, and Admiral Dönitz ordered the Seerauber, or pirate wolfpack, to attack it. Unfortunately, Seerauber was not as effective a fighting force as U-boat command would have wished. It was only 7 boats strong, and not all of them were in position even by the time the convoy had sailed. Most had been at sea for some time already and were not in peak fighting trim, having picked up a fair number of defects through action and weather damage. Worse, 4 of the boats were on their very first war cruises, with largely inexperienced captains and crews. It had been originally planned for HG76 to sail on December the 15th, but heavy congestion in Gibraltar harbour compelled it to set out a day early. The first contact between the opposing sides came just before midnight the same day. A Gibraltar-based Swordfish obtained a radar spot on a U-boat, U-67, 6.5 miles off the starboard beam of the convoy, and attacked it immediately. The submarine took evasive action to port and dived, and all 3 depth charges fell over the target. At 01:35, the same Swordfish located another U-boat, U-108, 10 miles astern of the convoy. This also dived immediately, not knowing that the British plane had expended all of its depth charges. The Swordfish had no radio, and it took some time for the contact to be reported to the convoy escort. Walker first learned of the attack via a message from the British Admiralty. Their direction finders had confirmed that a U-boat in the area made a sighting report. In accordance with his new tactics, Walker immediately detailed Deptford and Rhododendron to search the area. No contact was made, and the 2 escorts abandoned the hunt at 0400. Later that night, another Swordfish attacked a 3rd U-boat with 2 depth charges. Again, no result. By the morning of December 15th, HG76 was beyond the operational radius of Gibraltar-based Swordfish, and was reliant for air cover solely on Audacity's 4 Martlet planes. Patrols were duly sent out, but they failed to spot any U-boats. It seemed that the Germans had been given the slip. In consultation with Commander McKendrick of Audacity, Walker therefore decided to suspend all anti-submarine air patrols for the time being. The flying hours of the fighters were limited and had to be conserved as much as possible. This was a gamble, and HG76 turned out to be unlucky. Although the U-boat patrol line had indeed failed to spot the convoy, the Germans had other resources. At 18:48 on the evening of December the 15th, whilst patrolling 10 miles ahead of the convoy, the destroyer Stanley reported a Focke-Wulf Condor reconnaissance aircraft circling just outside of gun range. The fighters had already been stood down, and there was very little the destroyer could do. Radio signals from the Condor alerted every U-boat in the Sea Rauber Wolfpack and directed them to intercept courses. However, U-127, moving hurriedly into position, had to run the gauntlet of the hunting group. She was spotted and sunk with all hands by the Australian destroyer Nestor, just off Cape St Vincent. On the afternoon of December 16th, the 5 smaller escorts from Gibraltar were detached back. Meanwhile, the first U-boat had made contact. U-131 sent a sighting report and then settled down to shadow, surfacing at regular intervals to send in further reports. The first of these proved to be very alarming for the submarine. Due to a hydrophone failure, she came to periscope depth in the very middle of the convoy, but fortunately was not spotted. British direction finders did however pick up her signals and pass the information on to Walker. The response was swift. The following morning, air patrols were reinstated, and one duly spotted U-131 22 miles off the convoy's port beam. The 3 fastest of the escorts, Blankney, Exmoor and Stanley, were vectored into the attack. The corvette Penstemon, which happened to be the closest at the time, also joined in, and it was her Haslick that made the first contact with the submarine. Penstemon dropped a depth charge pattern but then lost contact. She then joined the others in a line abreast formation and made a concerted search. The 4 British ships swept an area 12 miles to westward and then turned south. U-131 was not in this search area, but she had been badly damaged in Penstemon's first attack. A lot of water had come in aft and made contact with the U-boat's batteries, which began to release poisonous chlorine gas. Corvette Captain Bowman knew he would be forced to surface soon, and so went deep and attempted to put as much distance between himself and the escorts as possible. His efforts were in vain. U-131 was only 10 miles away when at 12:47 she was finally forced to surface. She was instantly spotted and attacked. The U-boat valiantly fought back, shooting down one of Audacity's fighters that made a strafing run, but a single deck gun was no match for the concentrated firepower of the escorts. Bowman gave the order to abandon ship at 13:30 and then scuttled his command. The action was watched by 2 more U-boats, U-434 and U-574, which quietly slipped away. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. British direction finders continued to report that the convoy was being shadowed. As soon as it was dark, the entire convoy made a sudden 80-degree turn to starboard in order to try and throw the Germans off the scent. However, by now the U-boats were all around the convoy and were beginning to close in. U-434 made contact just after midnight, sent off a sighting report and settled down to shadow. December the 18th dawned bright and clear, the sea glassy calm. These weather conditions helped German reconnaissance aircraft to locate the convoy, but in every other regard worked to the advantage of the escorts. Good visibility made it difficult for U-boats to approach on the surface. U-434 was unwise enough to leave her withdrawal beyond the horizon just a little too late, and she was spotted by the destroyer Stanley when only 6 miles off the port quarter of the convoy. On receipt of the destroyer's warning, the entire convoy altered course to directly north. Stanley then charged in to attack. U-434 hurriedly dived and lined up on the approaching destroyer. She fired a single torpedo, which missed. That should have ended the affair, as Stanley's ASDIC had broken down. However, the submarine's position was given away by a large oil slick. Stanley began to lay charges in the form of a square around the submarine, hoping to pin her into position. 3 sides of the square had been completed when Blankney came up to assist. She obtained both ASDIC and hydrophone contacts almost instantly, and laid a snap 6-charge pattern on the violently swerving U-boat. Blankney then guided Stanley to lay a 14-strong pattern at deep setting, and then followed up with another spread of 6 charges of her own, this time at medium setting. U-434 was so badly shook up by these attacks that one of her own stern torpedoes exploded. Water poured in from the conning tower and the forward torpedo room. The lights and steering gear both failed. Corvette Captain Hayden struggled to bring her to the surface to get his crew off. The instant U-434 appeared, she was fiercely engaged. So eager were the escorts that Blankney attempted to ram, even though the U-boat was already clearly sinking. Hayden swung U-434 away, and Blankney did as much damage to herself as she did to the submarine. When it became clear the Germans were abandoning ship, the British attempted to board, but the U-boat sank before they could reach it. Nor was this all, for during the afternoon 2 more Focke-Wulf Condors were successfully intercepted by martlets from Audacity. The reconnaissance planes made a break for it, and only escaped destruction because the fighters' guns jammed. These were heartening successes for the defenders, But on the negative side, at 1100 hours, Blankney and Exmoor, the last fast escorts available, had to be detached back to Gibraltar to refuel. The last remaining destroyer, Stanley, was running extremely short of potable water and would also have to return to Gibraltar by the 20th of December at the latest. As dusk fell on December 18th, the U-boats began to close in. Pensterman spotted one of them, U-574, and calling for help, moved to attack. Both Stanley and Convoy responded, and gunfire quickly forced the U-boat down. The three escorts spent nearly 2 hours prosecuting the contact with Asdick. Nonetheless, U-574 managed to give her assailants the slip. During the search, U-67 attempted to torpedo the Convoy, and the corvette was forced to make a hasty turn to comb the tracks of several torpedoes. This was the opportunity Corvettan Capitan Gentleback of U-574 had been looking for. He surfaced and followed the escorts, hoping that he would be led directly to the merchant ships. The British were alive to the possibility of this. The corvettes went ahead, while Stanley used a broad zigzag in the rear to try and throw off such a shadowing attempt. Gentleback was up to the challenge, however, and was able to close in on the convoy. Around about 03:45, Stanley spotted U-574 again. 10 minutes later, torpedoes approached her from the port quarter. Stanley turned sharp to starboard at full speed and signalled the flagship that she was under attack. Walker, unsure of Stanley's exact position, ordered her to fire starshell. Before the order could be obeyed, the two ships came into sight of each other. They were just exchanging challenges when Stanley spotted more torpedoes approaching on her port beam that were too close to avoid. One struck just forward of amidships. There was a titanic explosion, in which flames leaped several hundred feet into the moonless sky. The luckless destroyer listed heavily, then broke in two and sank. Every merchant ship in the convoy promptly fired off snowflake rockets, but, as was to happen all too often, the sudden illumination aided the U-boats as much as it did the defenders. The British were lucky, with torpedoes just missing Stork, Audacity, and the merchant ship Largo. Walker had ordered Buttercup astern, and a large number of escorts turned to the rear to hunt U-574. Stork herself made the contact at a mere 700 yards range, and Walker ordered a snap attack. Stork fired 2 depth charge patterns that were so shallow that she damaged her own dynamo. A third attack was begun, but the submarine had been heavily damaged and surfaced only 200 yards from the sloop. Stork manoeuvred to ram, but U-boats are small and agile, and U-574 was able to turn inside the escort. The range was too short to depress guns, and so the two vessels madly turned about each other, the crews exchanging curses and shaking fists. They completed 3 entire circles in the next 11 minutes. Eventually Stork managed to strike U-574 just before the conning tower and rolled her over. The U-boat scraped down Stork's side to her aft, where she was finished off by 10 depth charges dropped at minimum setting. Stork and Samphire picked up 18 survivors from U-574, and another 28 from Stanley. Meanwhile, helped by the illumination, U-108 had closed in on the convoy's port bow. At about 05:15 she put a torpedo into the lead ship of the port column, the Rockinja. The merchant ship immediately lost all power and came to a dead stop. In spite of the danger, another merchant, Finland, bravely dropped back and picked up most of the crew of the Rockinja. Walker realised that the hulk of the freighter could not be saved and ordered Samphire to scuttle her. As the corvette moved to obey, another Focke-Wulf Condor appeared at long range and observed the operation. It seemed to bode very ill for the future. Meanwhile, at U-boat headquarters in Lorient, it was becoming increasingly clear that the attack on HG76 was not going well. Few successes had been reported, and there was an ominous silence from at least 3 U-boats. His advisers believed the operation should be cancelled, but Dönitz decided to reinforce the Wolfpack and press home the attack. As yet he was unaware of both the strength of the escort and the unfavourable weather conditions. 3 U-boats from the 7th Flotilla, based at Lorient, were duly dispatched. All were long-serving boats with experienced crews. U-567 was commanded by Corvettan Captain Endros, the U-boat fleet's reigning top-scoring ace. Dönitz thought so highly of him that he specifically announced Endros's assignment to the U-boats already on station, believing that this would act as a fillip to their morale. The rest of December 19th and the whole of the 20th passed fairly quietly. The Germans were content to keep their remaining submarines just over the horizon and wait their reinforcements, while keeping the convoy under observation with aircraft. 2 Focke-Wulf Condors were successfully intercepted by fighters from Audacity. A deadly aerial game of hide-and-seek ensued, with the bigger German planes trying to dodge between patches of cloud. One Condor was destroyed and the other heavily damaged and driven off. In the early afternoon of the 19th, another Condor tried a low-level approach, presumably to try and avoid radar detection. It also fell to the guns of the martlets. Then one of the patrolling fighters spotted a submarine, U-107, on the surface about 7 miles off the convoy's port beam. Deptford, Marigold and Convolvulus were instantly detached to intercept. The Germans were fortunate that this hunting group failed to make contact, as U-107 was the boat directing the reinforcements from L'Orient. The returning escorts were mistaken for U-boats and provoked a flurry of snowflake and starshell, but luckily no gunfire. Following reports of 2 U-boats directly ahead later that day, the convoy made a sharp turn to starboard to try and avoid them. At 09:10 on the morning of December 21st, an air patrol detected 2 U-boats alongside each other about 25 miles astern of the convoy. Unusually, they did not dive when the martlet attacked, but instead elected to fight it out on the surface. This seemed to confirm that they were engaged in some kind of repair work. Walker deliberated. They were really too far away and the surviving escorts too slow to engage in normal circumstances, but the opportunity seemed too good to miss. A hunting group consisting of Deptford, Penstoman, Vetch and Samphire was dispatched. Walker also asked for long-range aircraft from Gibraltar and Portsmouth to assist, as the short-range martlet would have been able to keep the enemy under observation until the hunting group could attack. None, however, were available. Inevitably, the Germans dispersed, and 2 hours later the relief aircraft was unable to locate them. The hunting group was still over 12 miles from their estimated position, and reluctantly Walker recalled them. During the afternoon, at least 3 more U-boat contacts were made, one by Marigold, one by Stork, and one by aircraft. It was becoming clear that the U-boats surrounding the convoy were once more closing in, and that a concerted attack would develop during the night. With the escort now much weakened, Walker decided on a ruse to blunt the onslaught. When darkness fell, the convoy was to make a sharp turn to port, away from the expected approach path of most of the submarines. The Deptford hunting group, which had not yet rejoined, would continue on the original course and at a prearranged signal stage a mock battle, complete with snowflake, starshell and gunfire. This, it was hoped, would draw some, if not all, the U-boats to the hunting group and away from the convoy. It was a good plan, but poorly executed. The merchant ships had not been completely notified of what was intended, or had not understood it, and the sudden eruption of flares and gunfire came as a surprise to some of them. Therefore, in accordance with their standing orders, several of them fired off their own snowflake rockets, clearly illuminating themselves. In the sudden light, Finland, leading the port column, spotted a prowling U-boat off her port beam, attempted to ram. The submarine dived and easily evaded the clumsy merchant ship, but at least it had been unable to make an attack. Other U-boats were better able to benefit. A few seconds later, U-567 torpedoed the rear ship of the centre column, the Norwegian ship Anavor. She was heavily laden with iron ore and sank inside a single minute. There were only 4 survivors. There was an even higher price to be paid for the failed ruse. The previous night, Audacity had detached herself from the vulnerable convoy. Escorted by Rhododendron, she had zigzagged about 30 miles to starboard. Walker suggested that this night she did the same thing but to port, away from the anticipated approach path of the U-boat reinforcements. However, Captain McKendrick decided to sail to starboard. Perhaps he believed that the planned port turn of the convoy that night would cause him problems. Besides, all previous attacks had come from the port side. Unfortunately, the need to fight the mock battle meant that no escorts could be spared to accompany the carrier. She was thus 10 miles from any other British ship when U-751, cautiously approaching the illuminated convoy, stumbled across her. Corvettan Captain Bigalk of U-751 at first thought he had found a tanker. It was only as he closed to attack that he realised that he had the opportunity to destroy an even more valuable target, the Royal Navy's current only operational escort carrier. One torpedo with a spread of 4 struck home. Audacity's engine room flooded and she came to a stop. Conscious of the value of his victim, Bigalk risked closing into point-blank range, even though he was spotted and engaged by some of Audacity's light guns. 2 more torpedoes slammed home at 1000, and 10 minutes later, the precious carrier sank bow first. Well satisfied, and keen to avoid the escorts that he knew must now be hurrying towards Audacity's last position, Bigalk withdrew. Other U-boats pressed home their attacks on the convoy itself. A confused melee ensued. U-67 attempted to torpedo the cam ship Darwin, but missed, and was then forced down and depth charged for 2 hours by Samphire. Marigold got a radar contact on a U-boat and chased it for some distance before forcing it down. Deptford detected another U-boat trying to break through the port screen, and when the submarine crash dive, dropped no less than 5 depth charge patterns over the next hour. Vetch spent half an hour chasing another strong contact on the port beam. None of the escorts claimed any successes, but sometime, somewhere, one of them, probably the Deptford, must have destroyed U-567. In addition, U-67 was so badly damaged that she was forced to withdraw from the battle completely. It was a particularly dark night, and as it wore on, fog and mist reduced visibility even further. At 05:15, Deptford, after her apparently fruitless attacks, inadvertently rammed the Stork. She slammed 1/3 of the way into the flagship's quarterdeck, tragically puncturing a temporary prison for captured U-boat crews, 2 of whom were horribly crushed to death. The ASDIC of both ships was wrecked, but fortunately the engines and steering gear of Stork were just missed. The speed of both ships was reduced to 10 knots due to the damage. Stork began to settle so much at the stern that depth charge had to be moved forward to lighten her. All in all, it had been a very rough night. Dawn of December 22nd found the convoy largely intact, but the escorts in very poor shape. Audacity and Stanley were both gone. Stork and Deptford both badly damaged and incapable of anti-submarine operations. All crews were exhausted by 6 days of continuous engagement, and most of the radar sets had broken down. Nothing displayed their impotence more than the arrival of another Focke-Wulf Condor at about 11:15. Without Audacity's aircraft, the reconnaissance plane was unable to circle out of range of the escort's guns and signal their every move. U-71 and U-125, diverted from the United States East Coast, had also made contact. The good news was that HG76 was now within the range of RAF Coastal Command and was escorted by Liberator aircraft throughout the afternoon and evening. One of them forced down a U-boat 17 miles off the port bow of the convoy at about 12:45. Another discovered 2 more just off the horizon from the convoy at 1600, forcing them to crash dive as well. Although this meant the U-boats had been effectively suppressed throughout the day, it was quite clear they were still in contact and that another attack would develop during the night. Although his mock battle ruse had not worked the previous night, Walker considered that it had hardly been given a fair chance and made arrangements for a repeat performance. Deptford and Jonquil were chosen to fight the mock battle, while the convoy was given specific instructions to make a sharp turn to port and not to fire Snowflake. All went ahead as planned, and that night no U-boat was able to make a successful attack. U-751, U-125 and U-71 all attempted and failed to penetrate the screen. U-751 was spotted on ASDIC by Vetch and was lucky to escape destruction. The depth charge explosions caused quite a panic in the merchant ship Ogmore Castle. Several of her crew thought she had been torpedoed, and despite the fact that she was still moving, somehow managed to take to a lifeboat. It took over an hour and a half to recover them. By December 23rd, HG76 was nearing the British Isles, and more support was becoming available. A reinforcement group from Western Approach's command arrived in the afternoon. One of them, Witch, spotted some smoke at 1620, which turned out to be a submarine on the surface ahead of the convoy. Witch called for support and attacked, but the good visibility that had betrayed the U-boat enabled her to spot the destroyer too. She dived while still some 8 miles away. The escort searched with ASDIC for an hour, but the submarine got clean away. This clash proved to be the last trial for HG76. The failure of the big attack over the night of December 19th and 20th had been the final straw for Dönitz. His crews were also very tired and dispirited by their lack of success and heavy losses. By the time of this incident, U-boat Command had already decided to officially abandon the operation against HG76. U-67 was ordered home and the others directed to other areas. The rest of the voyage passed uneventfully, and HG76 arrived in the United Kingdom on December the 27th. Convoy HG76 was a watershed in the Battle of the Atlantic. For the first time, a large-scale wolfpack attack on a convoy was fended off with little loss to the merchants and heavy losses to the attackers. 5 U-boats was far too high a price to pay for the destruction of only 2 merchant ships, even given the hefty damage also meted out to the escorts. Commander Walker, long overlooked, was lauded when he reached London. He was invited to numerous anti-submarine committees and conferences, and his ideas and theories listened to and thoroughly discussed. There were many elements of the British success. Large numbers of escorts and tight formation control of the merchants were certainly important factors. The quieter opening few days of the voyage had been used effectively to practice collective turns. The The double ring of escorts proved difficult for the U-boats to penetrate, particularly as it was unexpected. Radar and ASDOC performed extremely well, but the sets in use were still too rare and worse, unreliable. Rough weather and rougher handling soon rendered them useless. It was clear that both more and better sets would have to be made available. Even more important than radar and ASDOC was air cover, which not only forced the U-boats down but also fended off the reconnaissance aircraft they relied upon to guide them to their targets. Audacity performed sterling service with only 4 small fighters. It was quite apparent that the provision of larger escort carriers with bigger air groups would offer enormous benefits. Requests to convert merchant ships in the past have been resisted as unwarranted distractions. Following HG76, 4 merchant ships under construction were earmarked for conversion to escort carriers, and more purpose-built carriers were ordered from American yards as part of the Lend-Lease arrangements. Undoubtedly, however, the most important factor of all was Walker's new aggressive tactics. Instead of waiting for U-boat attacks to develop, Walker vigorously took the fight to them. Even if these counterattacks were unsuccessful, they forced the submarines to dive, which would usually result in them losing contact with the convoy, owing to their low underwater speed. Walker continued to expand his theories with several follow-ups to Buttercup, right until his untimely death of natural causes in 1944. Although both sides correctly saw HG76 as a notable, if costly, victory for the escorts, Dönitz misinterpreted the results. He believed that defeat had been solely due to a combination of poor weather and an unusually powerful escort. He reasoned that the weather would not always favour the defenders, and the Allies would be unable to field such large escort forces for every future convoy. To a certain extent he was right. The British were unable at first to profit from all the hard-won lessons of HG76. They simply did not have the resources to fully implement all the changes and modifications that were required, nor did they yet have enough escorts. There was still much hard fighting to be done on the sea lanes, and in the period after the USA entered the war, the U-boats were to achieve some of their most spectacular successes. Nevertheless, the lessons have been learned. HG76 has shown quite clearly that the U-boats could be beaten, and what ships, technology and tactics will be needed to win.